Hello and welcome to another video with me, Eli Acheson-Elmassry, and in this video, it's going to be a bit shorter than some of the other ones. We're going to look at three paints that maybe get a little bit confused sometimes and people aren't always sure how to choose between them. So we're going to look at the difference today between watercolor paint, gouache paint and acrylic paint, and I'm going to give you a little demonstration and describe the different properties so you can maybe experiment for yourself. So I'm going to bring the camera right round and we can focus today on some paper. I'm going to show you something to do on paper, and let's get started. Okay, so here on the paper, what I have done is I've already pre-prepared some strips of colour, and I've used a kind of medium red here, and the first one I've done is in acrylic, the second one is gouache, and the third one is in watercolour. And what I'm going to show you to start off with is I'm just going to do exactly the same thing and show you how I made those, but I've done those for a reason which I'll come to in just a minute. I've put out here on my palette, I'm using an enamel plate again, and all I need to mix these with is water. I don't need any fancy solvents unlike oil paint, so it's lovely that they all have this kind of simplicity about them, that all you need basically to mix them is water. And the first one I've put out here is acrylic. Now you can see straight away that it's a bigger gloop I've put out, I'm just going to mix a bit of water in there. Actually I'm going to use a bit almost flat on there, and I'm just going to paint it quite thickly on that paper, just like that. And you'll see straight away that it's very opaque, you can't really see through that. And then I'm going to add a little bit more water to it. Excuse me, I'm a bit sniffy, I'm getting a bit of allergy in this autumn weather we're having here in the UK. Beautiful day, beautiful colours, and brown is starting to make a big appearance in the palette now, because you just kind of sense all those browns in nature right around me where I'm living, right out in the heart of nature. As I paint this now, add some water going down, and I'm adding water to it so you can begin to see that you can make this paint quite thin, and as you add more water to it, it will go very, very transparent, which is one of the lovely things about acrylic paint, is that it's got this enormous range. You can work it very thick and create what we call like an impasto, which is a very thick painting technique, and you can also create a wash, which is a very transparent thin layer of paint. So you can see there the range between that very thick opaque and then that fine thinness, and I can add even more water down there and take it all the way down. I know that for some people it's not so easy to download these long videos, so I'm going to mix up some long ones with some short ones, but some things can't be rushed, particularly when I take you more into the heart of painting and the spirit of it. But when we're looking at some techniques, I think we can be a lot quicker. There we go, you see, so that's a fantastic range you've got there with the acrylic paint. The other wonderful thing about acrylic paint is that it dries very fast. Now I'm going to go on straight away now to the gouache paint. This is the one I've got here. Gouache is another water-based paint. You might regard it as something in between watercolour and acrylic. It's known for its opacity, that's to say how opaque it is and how very brilliant it can be as a paint. Now these are all burnt sienna, but there is a little bit of variation you can see in the actual tone here. So straight away, I hope you can see on the camera, I might need to zoom in a little bit in a minute, even more, it can create a beautiful, flat, brilliant tone of colour, a block of colour if you like, but also you can continue to add water to it to increase its transparency, like I'm doing here. And so you can also produce very thin glazes of colour. I'm doing this rather quickly. I'm not sure I'll be able to get this video under 10 minutes, but we'll see how it works out. I don't put a timer on it. There we go. So there you have also a big gradual range from a very opaque colour down through to a transparent colour. So at the moment they might not look very different at all actually, although there's a difference in the feel of them. However, one thing I would say straight away is that with acrylic paint I might paint on paper, and here I'm just using some sturdy watercolour paper that's £140 weight, which I may have talked about before I think. But you could also use acrylic paint on cardboard, best if it's primed with a painted surface first of all, but you can also use it on canvas and on linen. So it's, and I've been painting on different other fabrics as well, so it's extremely versatile, whereas gouache will not stick to canvas, it won't bind to the surface very readily. So gouache would always be a paint that I would be using on paper or on a card or some kind of surface like that rather than canvas. So that is an immediate difference between them. If you're set on painting on canvas, I would go for acrylic. And I will show you some samples after I've done this technique with you. I'll show you a few samples of work that I've done on those different surfaces. Now I'm going to show you the watercolour one. Well, watercolour, of course, you would not use that on canvas either. You would only use that on paper. And I've talked in the past about how important and critical it is, the actual quality of that paper. Now, as soon as you put the watercolour paint out, if you were doing one by next to each other, you would feel it's more sticky because of the content of gum arabic in the paint. So slightly different binders. Gouache usually has some of that as well, but it's a different degree. And you would probably also notice immediately, as soon as you add water to it, the transparency comes shining through. So this is not a paint we can really make look very opaque at all. As soon as you add water, it has this, and this is its particularly wonderful quality, it has this brilliant transparency to it, which is of course why the quality of the paper is so important, because the paper is always visible through the surface of the paint. If I was to use that even just straight out of the tube, it's almost impossible to make that completely opaque. However, of course, if you wanted to get increased opacity, you could paint layer over a layer over a layer, but you would probably not choose watercolour paint for that purpose. Now, the other thing to note is that of all the paints per milliliter, watercolour paint is the most expensive, the finest of them all. So usually you work with fairly small quantities and you only need quite small quantities, and therefore you usually only work at a fairly small size. So it is really a painting of intimacy in a way, a paint, and I'm just going to add more water to that now. I'll actually add it on the paper. I hope you can see that. I'm moving this plate around, but I'm not working with a cameraman here, or even any kind of camera person except me, so I'm hoping that you can see it. I'll just move that over there, out of the shot. So you can see there the acrylic is the most opaque, but will offer you transparent qualities. The gouache is always opaque when it's used straight and can be opaque, but it also offers that wonderful range, but can't really be used properly on canvases or other kinds of surfaces other than things like paper and related to paper, cardboard, those sort of things. And then the watercolour paint is pretty much always transparent, unless you layer it, of course. Use a tissue to dab that off. And I would only ever use that probably on paper. I have used it on, you can use it on silk, actually you can use it on some of those other finer fabrics, but not on a canvas. Now what I've also done over here is I've painted these strips here, and I've dried them out. The fastest drying paint is the acrylic paint usually, unless you're in a warm climate, in which case they will all dry very, very quickly. So I've labelled these here acrylic, gouache and watercolour, and I'm just going to show you, I'm going to choose a strongly contrasting colour now. Say a blue. I'm going to go for an ultramarine in each shade so that it provides enough contrast to try some overpainting. Now overpainting is literally what it says really, you're painting over the top of something, and we're just going to see the effects of that. Excuse me, coughing and grumbling. I'm really wheezing with this leaf mould. Ironically, surrounding myself with leaves. Oh. Okay, so I've just put out some ultramarines there, and I've put out acrylic, gouache and watercolour in ultramarine now. I'm going to use a smaller paintbrush, and actually I'm just going to come behind the camera and check and see if we can see that close enough up on the surface. Now I'm going to zoom in a bit more now. Oh, wrong way. I'll tilt this down as well. Okay, so I hope that's more visible for you. Do let me know in the comments what's helpful. If you can help me in the comments or suggestions, or direct message me on Instagram, and I can answer any questions you may have, or try to make a video if I get some requests to make video about certain kinds of techniques or media, then I'm very happy to try and do that for you. Now I'm going to paint on top of the acrylic to begin with, and I've added a bit of water to that, and I'm just going to paint straight over it. I'm going to do a little bit down there at the bottom, and you can see, I hope you can see, that there is no bleed. That's to say there is one paint, because the first layer has dried, when I paint over the top of it I can paint successfully. That's to say I can paint it and it will remain true to the colour that I'm painting. Now it might be that I want to mix the colours together, in which case, you know, and get really kind of more expressive in a sense, expressionistic I suppose, in a stylistic sense, where I mix the colours together on the surface, and maybe use a palette knife or something like that. You can use, but I'll just show you, I happen to have one right here, palette knife. This is, I hope you can see that in the shot, a palette knife which is you know, traditional implement of oil colour painting, but very popular with acrylic painting as well. And if you want to work quite thickly, you might literally scoop that up, or even use a mixer to make that even thicker, and you can, you know, do that over the surface, and then you can even kind of scratch into it and create some other sort of textures, and that works quite well of course on canvas which is a very yielding and strong surface. Now we'll try the same thing on the gouache. I'm going to try gouache on top of gouache paint now, and this one's a bit dried out. Let's lighten that up a bit. And similar effect, very, very similar effect indeed. So you can overpaint on gouache quite well. It will really take that quite well. If your painting is dry underneath, you want to create layered effects or patterns, if you're designing something, then that will work quite well. However, if I was to, if I was to work it, I have not practiced this bit. Oh. If I add water to that, yeah, it's what happens is, and I sort of move it around, I'm basically mixing that in with the red now, and it starts to lose the pure blue. It's mixing with the red, going a sort of browny colour. However, if I was doing that back on the acrylic, and I started to do that over there, I could maybe have used a lighter blue, might have shown up a bit more readily. Try to mix that in. Well, it won't do it, because the paint underneath is completely dry. So that is one great, you know, these are all the different properties that you have. Now you can see, actually you can see the line of the red there, it hasn't moved, it hasn't budged, even if I rub it. That's completely resistant. And that's, you know, that's a different kind of effect, isn't it? That one's gone quite brown now. If I move on to the watercolour, I'll say clean your water, but anyway, I'm trying to keep this fairly condensed. Now I'll try to paint this over the top this time. And I'm not sure how clearly that you can read that, but what I can see quite clearly happening close up here is that already the red is mixing in with the blue. They're kind of mixing together. So, and then if I paint one on top of the other, that red is gone. It's turned to a kind of, well, blue and red make purple, so it's become a sort of purpley colour. It's rather gone beautiful in its effects. But what you haven't retained is that separate blue colour that's so visible on those paintings there. So that's a primary difference between the paints. So I hope that that has been helpful for you if you're a bit unsure and confused about what these paints can do, and maybe that's given you an idea of trying some of them out, and a bit more confidence perhaps about what you can do with them and how you can the range of things that you can do with them. If you've got any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to contact me in the comments below, or you can direct message me on Instagram. I'm Eli Acheson-Elmassry, and if you're interested in receiving any one-to-one tuition, either online or in person, then please do get in touch with me. My email is in the contacts, and I'll be happy to send you a price list. Either a one-off consultation with a portfolio of work that you have if you'd like some guidance and advice, or a course of lessons, either one-to-one or in groups. So please do feel free to get in touch. Thanks very much for watching.